Fox News alert, we are awaiting the release of redacted copies of the search warrant that allowed the FBI to briefly reopen the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails days before the election. Clinton's team has blamed her loss on FBI Director James Comey's last-minute decision to reopen the probe after a new trove of messages was found on a computer belonging to Anthony Weiner, the estranged husband of her top aide Huma Abedin. Several days later, Comey announced the emails contain no new evidence of any wrongdoing by Clinton. We'll bring you more once the documents are out.
There's that, and then this Fox News alert as well. The world is in and around Europe within a 24-hour period. In Turkey, the Russian ambassador was assassinated while he was at the microphone speaking at the opening of a photography exhibit. We were on this yesterday at this hour. Witnesses heard the gunman shout, "God is great" in Arabic, and words about Russia's role in the civil war in Syria. In Switzerland, a gunman shot at least 3 people at an Islamic center in Zurich. And in Berlin, the news still breaking with a manhunt underway after an apparent stolen tractor trailer plowed into a crowded Christmas market. More than 12 people confirmed dead, another 50 hurt. German police now saying they may have the wrong man in custody. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, Meghan McCain, who you just saw, Republican strategist and Fox News contributor Lisa Booth, commentator and the national spokeswoman for the Libre Initiative, Rachel Campos Duffy, and today's hashtag One Lucky Guy, the brand new car smell editor-in-chief of the Weekly Standard and Fox News contributor Steve Hayes. You're outnumbered, but wow. Congratulations.
Thanks. It's a bit, new car smells better than some other smells.
Oh, no, it's all good. People buy that in the ornament. They want that.
That's good.
That's great. You excited?
I am excited. I mean, you know, it's been, the magazine's been around for 21 years. I've been there for almost 16 years. I've learned a ton from Bill Kristol. He's going to be sticking around. He's going to be writing weekly editorials. So it's going to be largely the same magazine. But I'm excited to do some new and interesting things.
Well, part of what you've been writing about is Aleppo, Syria, and we're going to talk about this. So let's get to the news. Glad you're here. We'll begin with the horror in Germany. Just days before Christmas, German authorities are searching for the driver who rammed a big rig into a Christmas market in Berlin in what they consider to be an act of terrorism. Senior foreign affairs correspondent Greg Palcott is in Berlin, and Greg reports now that they have a man in custody, but perhaps not the right man.
A man in custody, Harris, but you're right. They are not sure that he is the one that they want. It is a city on edge right now. As people mill around here, we are standing right in front of what was a scene of terror last night when a 7.5-ton truck rammed into a Christmas market filled with people. We're getting more information about the casualty toll. 12 killed, 6 of them Germans, 1 Polish. We still don't know about the nationalities of 5 others. 48 injured, 18 of them seriously. We're waiting on nationalities on them as well. Yes, we don't know who did it. Police think they had the right guy, a 23-year-old Pakistani asylum seeker who was seen fleeing from the scene. We thought he hijacked this truck and rammed it into the crowds and then left. But now they're saying perhaps he isn't the right person. Perhaps they need somebody else. Perhaps they have to wait on DNA to confirm one way or another. He's denying it, and they're not sure. They're also not completely sure what group is responsible for this. There have been no solid claims of responsibility from ISIS or other terror groups, but certainly this has all the hallmarks. We were there in Nice, France earlier this year, and certainly this looks like what happened there. A truck smashing through people, injuring and killing people. Also, there have been alerts from the State Department and from the authorities here that they should look out for this kind of thing, and it could be tied to ISIS. But again, they're still waiting for the responsibility. But again, the authorities here are almost positive it is terror, but they still have to put a few other pieces together. And the political fallout, too, finally, Harris. Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, on the hot seat as we speak. It was her policy that allowed almost 1 million refugees, immigrants, into this country last year. A lot of people feared that increased the insecurity in this country, and a lot of people fear that perhaps this incident could have been tied to that. Again, we don't know. She was here laying flowers at a memorial, a makeshift memorial, saying that Germans cannot live in fear. They have to live in freedom. But tonight, in Berlin right now, Harris, there are a lot of people on edge and a lot of people looking out to try to find more answers to this horrible, horrible attack. Back to you.
Greg, thank you very much. As we come out to the couch to discuss this, Steve, a couple of things pop up, and I talked about the fact that Donald Trump obviously had an immediate response to this, and we'll get to that in a moment. But I just want to ask what all this means in kind of the big picture.
Well, I mean, the question that you keep hearing is this the new normal? And we hear that question so often that I think the question answers itself, right? I mean, in a sense, it is the new normal because we keep having to ask that question. I don't think it can be allowed to be the new normal, but when you have the kinds of policies, I think that have led us as a country and led us as the West not to take seriously the threat, particularly the threat posed by radical Islamic terrorism, you're likely to see a proliferation of exactly these kind of attacks.
So we mentioned the wrong man that authorities think that they picked up, and by wrong they don't think that he's the driver, but the first person that they had arrested was identified as someone who was a refugee, who had some problems in country, from Pakistan, so on and so forth. He may not have been the driver, but it does raise that issue that Greg was talking about within the country, that weakness in security that their immigration policies had kind of put into force.
Yeah, this has been an issue that's been dominating European politics over the past couple of years, but in particular in Germany, where Angela Merkel has made sort of a show of welcoming refugees and suggesting that they don't present much of a threat. I think the view is increasingly that there is a threat there. Common sense tells you that there may be an increased threat there, and no doubt if that's what turns out to have happened, this will thrust that even more into the debate.
You know, Megan, this was, there were several things going on during our hour yesterday. That the Turkish ambassador from Russia was there, and he was dealing with kind of navigating, outside of what he was speaking at, navigating this idea of Syria and Russia's involvement there. So he had a big job, and in fact, witnesses say that the man who shot and killed him, assassinated him, was talking about Syria, screaming about it.
Yeah, he was screaming, "We'll die in Aleppo." And I think the one thing I don't want people to confuse is it looks like there's different political motivations for both of these terrorist attacks. This is obviously someone, well, from everything we can garner from the report so far, this is someone who is motivated by Russia's involvement in Syria, aiding terrorism. I would assume the recent bombings of hospitals in Syria by Russian planes. The Post one is, like we said, the new normal. Terrorists taking large vans, shoving them into, giant crowds of people. What we saw in Nice. Again, Angela Merkel in particular is patient zero for all of this. Like you said, she was really in the forefront of letting all these refugees in. We have talked at length on this show about how they ran out of pepper spray because so many women were being sexually assaulted in the streets. The ramifications for the last 8 years of progressive policies, not only in this country, but globally as well. This is the chickens coming home to roost. And if I were a German right now, and I can't even go to the Christmas festival or Christmas, parades everywhere, I would be furious. And I think there's a picture that's been going viral where she was the last sort of progressive world leader standing, and I'm very curious to see if she's going to last.
It's interesting what you say, too, Rachel. What Megan is saying is that Germany today is telling its citizens to go out to those markets. This one was very iconic, by the way. It was built post World War II, and it sat in the shadows of an iconic World War II church. Yeah, so I mean, it was very famous.
Yeah, and so interesting that Donald Trump has not held back, right? His statement yesterday was, this is ISIS, and this is an attack on Christianity and the West. And we've focused so much on, or at least the media, on how scared the Europeans are of a Trump presidency. I have relatives in Europe. If you read the British papers and look at the comment section, people are actually looking forward to Donald Trump coming into office and having somebody to lead what appears to be a rudderless, global leadership that we have right now. So I think that kind of clarity is going to be welcome. And you're right, the German people are angry, and so are all the others. We had, the priest who was murdered at an altar. I mean, this is an attack on Christianity.
So I want to take this opportunity 1 second, Lisa, to kind of move us along here. Sure. And let's just get on point with what Rachel's talking about. The bloodshed yesterday got a quick response from the President-elect Donald Trump, and in a sharp departure, also a response from President Obama. Note the wording that he used. Not hesitant to blame radical Islamic terrorism. Interesting, considering he's not been using that term, even though this time around officials have not actually yet linked any of the attacks to ISIS or the Islamic terrorism that we've seen around the world. Mr. Trump posted, as Rachel just alluded to, this on social media about Berlin, Germany. Innocent civilians were murdered in the streets as they prepared to celebrate the Christmas holiday. ISIS and other Islamic terrorists continually slaughter Christians in their communities and places of worship as part of their global jihad. And about the assassination of Russia's ambassador to Turkey, Mr. Trump posted this: "We offer our condolences to the family and loved ones of Russian ambassador to Turkey, Andrei Karlov, who was assassinated by a radical Islamic terrorist." And he hit Twitter saying, "Today there were terror attacks in Turkey, Switzerland, and Germany, and it is only getting worse. The civilized world must change thinking." Your thoughts, Lisa?
Well, absolutely. And I think we're seeing the destabilization across the world, because it's not just Syria, right? It's Iraq as well. It's the Russia being emboldened, Iran being emboldened. And you see really under a lot of this happening under President Obama, whether it's the failure to leave a status of forces agreement in Iraq, the failure in Afghanistan as well, the deal with Iran, the failed Russia reset with Russia. And now we're seeing all these actors become emboldened and the destabilization coming across the country. So I think President-elect Trump, he's inheriting a very dangerous world. And there are so many challenges that he's going to be facing as he enters into the administration.
It's a cauldron
but we can't
of just
belittle
hotspots.
how significant it is he's saying radical jihadism and radicalism.
President Obama?
President Obama, and the fact that to me, it looks like he's been pressured by Donald Trump saying it over and over again.
Or maybe the rest of the country.
And the rest of the country as well. But that to me is historically significant, because so many of us have been so frustrated by the fact that he won't even name our enemy. So how can we defeat it if he won't even name it? So for me, this was an interesting moment in the last 4 weeks of his
And not just that he doesn't name it, he usually has this pattern of waiting like 4 days there, like we have to get all the details, and it's always been
the facts matter. The facts matter. So now you see him willing to use the term, but jump out in fact before anybody has taken responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, to me, we have this discussion all the time after these attacks.
So is that political?
This is not that complicated to me. Wait until you know what happened. But when you know what happened, talk about it, and talk about it clearly. I mean, we shouldn't.
Otherwise, does this look political?
We shouldn't. Yeah, I mean, I think when you have the President of the United States saying the things like this, when it breaks a pattern, what we've seen from the president in the past, it does. But at the same time, we shouldn't jump out and call it radical Islamic terrorism if we don't know that it is.
Right.
This is pretty clear. Wait till you get the evidence. When you have the evidence, address the problem in a right way. And what we haven't seen from the president, this being the exception, is him doing that. I mean, in the past, it's not just that he's refused to call radical Islamic terrorism what it is. In some cases, he's downplayed it. I mean, remember going back to the Christmas Day bomber in December of 2009,
right.
Yes.
We had a confession from Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib in December of 2009 to the FBI that he had been involved in Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and the president went out and suggested he was an isolated extremist. You can't have that, but you shouldn't jump to conclusions either.
I want to ask about, though, this idea that Donald Trump gets in, our president-elect gets in. His Secretary of State pick has happened, not confirmed yet. He hasn't even taken office. We don't know what his policies will look like. Is this maybe an indication that he had his hand on the pulse of things that maybe people didn't know? I mean, that was a quick response, and we'll have to see if the facts bear it out.
Well, no, I do think that the Donald Trump's victory was sort of a rejection of the weakness of President Obama. And if you remember, President Obama in his first 100 days, he had already apologized to 3 separate continents. And to Steve's earlier point, we also had, after the Orlando shooting, the redaction of the 9/11 calls, right? And you also had the Obama administration just weeks after saying that Al-Qaeda was on the run before a presidential election, lied to us about the origin of the Benghazi attacks as well. So I think it's not only been the weakness of the policies, but the failure to call it what it is just a further representation of sort of the weakness we've seen under President Obama, which I believe was rejected in this last election.
You know what I think is fascinating, Rachel? We would wait sometimes days, sometimes longer, for President Obama to react, and not always waiting for the facts, just waiting for him to react. With the new president-elect, maybe not so much because of social media. What are your thoughts on that?
What do you mean by that, Harris?
Well, I mean, it was pretty quick.
Oh yeah. But that's been his style. I mean, I think he hasn't. We all kind of know,
Is that
right?
good for the country?
I think that it's a breath of fresh air. Yeah. And I'll tell you, there's something else that Donald Trump said during the campaign that really has resonated with people, and that is, he says, we want people in our country who love us, who want to be part of us. And I think the Europeans are feeling that right now. They have been more than welcoming of all these people, and then they have this kind of reaction. So there's one, poor vetting, and two, a real lack of assimilation, a real lack of a plan. And I think Americans ought to look at this and go, not just are we vetting the people that are coming in, but what exactly is the plan by our government to properly assimilate these people into their culture?
I would say this, they're coming from the worst situation ever. Megan, you and I have talked about this, 890,000 refugees that Germany has taken. And you could have the best plans in hand, but they're leaving everything that they've known. So it's not like they've chosen to come here necessarily. It presents all sorts of challenges. Can you do a last quick word?
My last quick word just on what you were saying about the tweets with President-elect Trump. I love it because I get so angry and I say things that I could never say on television because it'd be censored and pulled off the air every time there's a terrorist attack. And I like that my anger is being validated because so much of the last 8 years has been, well, we need to think about it. We need to be open-minded. No, these people are going to kill us or we're going to kill them. And Donald Trump seems to be on the same page as I am.
We will, of course, bring you any breaking developments from those suspected terror hits. Here in America, you may notice tightened security. Our reporting on that is ahead. And President-elect Donald Trump won the Electoral College vote yesterday, officially securing his spot as the 45th president of the United States. But some in the mainstream media make it sound like there was a chance that might not have happened. Did they misfire again? And will Democrats ever accept the results of the election? Safe space. You like to accept our invitation, and we love that you do, to join us online when we pop up right after the TV version of us wraps up. Atop the hour, we're at foxnews.com/outnumbered. Tap Overtime on that page or go to Facebook. Our handle there, Outnumbered FNC for Facebook Live. And tweet when you get the urge. Or Twitter. Roll them out on the left side of the screen. We're coming right back.
Are you?
President-elect Donald Trump is winning the Electoral College vote, securing his spot as the 45th president of the United States of America. But leading up to the vote, some in the mainstream media kept pushing the idea that things could flip and Hillary Clinton could still somehow win. Watch.
Seems that people are still holding out hope that the Electoral College, when they vote tomorrow, will somehow miraculously decide that Hillary Clinton is the winner.
When the Founding Fathers created the Electoral College, they put it in place as a fail-safe against a demagogue like Donald Trump.
There's a hope, there's a glimmer of hope on the Constitution. These are the criteria with which the electors should be voting against Trump to be inaugurated.
So now the next question
if they are
is,
the patriotic Americans that they claim they are.
But Joy Behar, you and everyone else were all wrong. In fact, more electors ended up defecting from Hillary Clinton than from Mr. Trump, prompting him to tweet, quote, "We did it. Thank you to all of my great supporters. We just officially won the election, despite all of the distorted and inaccurate media." So I'm going to go to you first, Steve. There's this Harvard professor, Larry Lessig, who I guess ran for president this time around, who was saying 20 electors were going to end up moving and switching to Hillary. Obviously, he was wrong. Why do you think so many people bought into this?
Well, I mean, I think the first clip we played, Martha Raddatz and the ABC crew talking about it, they were clearly doing it in jest, but some people did take it seriously and pretend that this was going to happen. And the irony to me is that this takes place in the broader discussion of all of this fake news. So you had people leading viewers and radio listeners and their readers on, suggesting that this was likely or possible even, when pretty much everybody understood that it wasn't going to happen. But I will say that there's one bright side of this. I mean, it is nice to hear people like Joy Behar and Whoopi Goldberg talking about the Founding Fathers with reverence, which is not something that they do very often.
Or at all. But I mean, that fake news element that you're saying was leaving out the details in the story. Like, it wasn't created for Donald Trump or anybody like him. As I understand it, the Electoral College was created so that if there was not a clear vote getter in all of the electoral votes, then the House of Representatives would then decide like John Quincy Adams, like, it's a pretty easy read. Donald Trump isn't actually in there, or anybody like him. Am I wrong about that?
Well, no, I don't think the founders necessarily anticipated Donald Trump.
Or anybody like him.
They were trying to create a sort of a buffer. I think there are a lot of things that the founding fathers would be.
But it backfired. I mean,
about.
the bottom line is it backfired. And the other place it backfired, and Steve, you know this well as a fellow Wisconsinite, they tried to do this with Scott Walker's with the recall, and he actually won by a greater margin on the second time, just like Hillary lost electors in this recount, or whatever you want to call it. But listen, Joy Behar, all these celebrities, they were really the ones leading this. It wasn't necessarily people like Martha Raddatz, and it just shows the narcissism. They actually believe that there is the only opinion. And I talked about this earlier on a show. In Wisconsin, when they had the electors, a protester stood up and she said, "This is my America." And that's the feeling they have. They think it's theirs. They have forgotten that there's all these red states in between, and we matter too.
Well, and it's kind of funny, too, because earlier, I think it was last week at one of Donald Trump's thank you rallies where he had said that he hopes there's more recounts because he loves winning.
Yeah.
Which is just, kind of funny and, appropriate here. Because it is sort of a perfect ending for Donald Trump when, once again, this narrative that has been driven, that's over-sensationalized, overhyped, ends up being wrong. And Hillary Clinton is actually the one that ends up getting more defectors than Donald Trump. But I think there's a real problem and a danger for the media because I think because they have been so inaccurate and so blatantly blind in their hatred for Donald Trump that they've almost been rendered irrelevant because I think most people that are watching the news, they just don't believe anything anymore that is said. And so I think that's a real danger because, the media obviously serves a purpose, but, there's just not trustworthy anymore.
It's so funny. And what you're saying is that it's almost like the Democrats are assuring that even though Donald Trump may not have gotten a mandate, he could if they just keep recounting.
I keep telling people on my radio show, you need to pay more attention to the process, to all the Democrats that are whining and crying, and Joy Behar apparently saying she's the only opinion that really matters. You need to get your local officials elected. You need to pay more attention to who your congressman is, who your state officials are, and then go from there, because if you're not reflecting on what the Democrats have done wrong and what messaging you got wrong at this point, I don't know what else to do. But I know Republicans regrouped, did an autopsy report, and started from the ground up all over again, and complaining and whining and talking about how it's somehow unjust or a scandal, I find just wildly
Although Republicans
delusional.
did an autopsy, in fairness, they did an autopsy and then totally ignored everything that
They
was in
did
the
totally
autopsy.
ignore
Look, I mean, I think in terms of the mainstream media, it's not necessarily fair to say that everybody, that we saw Donald Trump coming, or that people accurately predicted that Donald Trump would win. Donald Trump himself said that he didn't think he was going to win on election night. So the media got that wrong, but a lot of people got that wrong. I got that wrong. I think what they're doing now is trying to give people this sense that Donald Trump is not a legitimate president when he won the election.
And what is the point of doing that, by the way?
To damage him as he goes in,
better.
to make him weaker.
And it's
so if we have problems that he could solve, then you take away the power to do that? I'm just curious as to why you want to damage the person who's in charge.
I think it's a little bit of revenge from Obama.
Doing the job.
Trump tried to delegitimize his presidency, and I think there's a little bit of that in there. But I also think that, Democrats think you get a participation trophy for these things, and you don't. You lose.
All the precious snowflakes. Trump's our president, man. Live with it. American cities are stepping up security following the deadly attack at a Christmas market in Berlin. The measures we're taking to protect ourselves here at home. And despite Berlin and other recent attacks around the world, President Obama is continuing his efforts to empty Guantanamo Bay as much as possible before he leaves office. Could this threaten our national security even more? We'll discuss.
Fox News Alert as we continue to cover the story of what's happened abroad with suspected terror attacks there. Cities across America now are tightening security after the deadly attack at a Christmas market in Berlin. In particular, a truck plowing into the crowd of shoppers there, killing at least 12 people, injuring many, many more. We're told there is no specific threat in the United States right now, but police are upping their presence in cities like New York, Chicago, and Boston. The NYPD moving heavily armed critical response command officers to Christmas displays around Manhattan. So this is something that you are going to notice in these bigger cities. Julie Banderas is at one of those places in Union Square. Julie?
Yeah, that's right, Harris. As it always does, anytime a terrorist event occurs anywhere in the world, of course, the NYPD keeping their eyes very close on that in trying to tie it together, if at all, here in New York City. And again, I will reiterate, like you said, there is no credible threat, but nonetheless, they're taking precautions. Case in point, at these Christmas markets, like the one I'm standing in here in Union Square, earlier there was a large police presence, and as I continue to talk about it, they just basically roll from one to another to another. So they're not predictable. They're basically there to give a strong warning for anyone who might actually consider doing something as horrendous as what happened in Germany yesterday. But again, no credible threat. But the shoppers here, obviously, going about their business as usual, despite the fact that, critical response units have been deployed to Christmas markets all over the city until more is learned about yesterday's attack in Berlin.
We see an attack in Germany. Our European posts then, flash back to their contacts and say, what was the target? How was it done? It was a truck. It was a Christmas market. We immediately go into the New York overlay. Where are the Christmas markets? We've got our list. They're here, 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 and here. We then deploy long gun resources, Hercules teams, critical response command teams, and we put that layer while we try to learn more.
Last month, the State Department issued a travel alert on Europe, urging caution at, quote, holiday festivals, events, and outdoor markets. Now, the NYPD's highly trained teams will be covering all high-profile locations all around New York City until more is learned about the motive behind the incident in Berlin. At this point, officials still haven't gotten any answers from a suspect they took into custody yesterday, who was picked up about a mile away from the scene. We are now learning, however, Berlin police may have arrested the wrong man, and a search for the driver is ongoing. Therefore, no one can confirm whether it was an accident or an attack. However, German officials are investigating it as a terror attack. And of course, nobody knows terror and terror investigations like the NYPD. So New York City officials urging once again, there's no credible specific threat on any Christmas markets here in the city. They asked shoppers to go about their business as usual, but nonetheless taking this attack in Berlin yesterday very seriously, as they do every terror attack that happens. Our eyes are always watching as they happen. Back to you.
Julie Banderas, thank you very much, and thanks to our New York's finest for keeping us safe.
Meanwhile, as we continue to learn more about the attacks in Berlin, Turkey, and Switzerland, President Obama is ramping up plans to clear out even more Gitmo detainees before handing over the keys to the White House. The New York Times says he informed Congress yesterday of his plans to transfer 17 or 18 of the remaining 59 detainees at the prison. If all goes as planned, that means President-elect Trump will inherit 41 or 42 detainees on January 20th. But according to the latest report by the Director of National Intelligence, 30% of all transferred detainees have been confirmed or suspected of re-engaging in terrorism. So, Steve, I'm going to go to you first. Donald Trump is dead set against closing Gitmo. He said he was going to, quote, fill it with as many bad dudes as possible. What do you make of this last-ditch effort to get rid of detainees?
Good. I think Donald Trump is right. I think it's deeply irresponsible what the President of the United States is doing. These are the worst of the worst. There's a reason that they remain in Guantanamo today. If you look at the kinds of people who are left, you're talking about people who are senior al-Qaeda figures, people who have played roles in attacks, people who are responsible for targeting U.S. troops and U.S. interests abroad. You look at the way that President Obama has handled this from the beginning, and I think it's just emblematic of his broader lack of seriousness about this issue. It's inconceivable to me that he would be releasing seasoned veteran terrorists back into the world, even if he's transferring them and they're supposed to be monitored, which doesn't happen very often, while we're fighting this threat. I mean, while this threat is increasing. The president, as you said earlier, went to re-election in 2012 and told us Al-Qaeda was decimated, Al-Qaeda was on the run. His then senior counterterrorism advisor, now CIA director, gave a speech in April of 2012 in which he said, we're not going to have to deal with this threat by the end of this decade. It's disastrously wrong. The threat has grown exponentially. It's greater than it was. You now hear this from people like Director Clapper, President Obama's top national security and intelligence official, and we're still releasing bad guys. It's just inconceivable.
So this was one of the first executive orders that he signed during his first 100 days as president. So this, you say he's not taking it seriously. He just may very well be taking legacy points more seriously. And
he started this way. Look, he started this way. The very first article that I wrote during the Obama administration was a piece about Guantanamo and how difficult it was going to be to empty Guantanamo given the problem we have with Yemenis who are kept there. This is the same problem today, and many of these people that he's talking about transferring now are the people that we wrote about in February of 2009 as major threats.
Look at the size of the battlefield now that just the Islamic State savages have created, now in 14 countries.
Well, and look, he's obviously doing this in the name of legacy because it flies in the face of common sense. We know, as Megan pointed out earlier, the recidivism rate is 30%. We shouldn't have to fight the same enemy twice. As Steve pointed out, the worst of the worst are still left, like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind behind 9/11. And you also look at the fact, again, another, flying in the face of common sense in the name of legacy, the failure to leave a status as forces agreement in Iraq. As you pointed out, look, ISIS has branches in at least 18 different countries now because of that, because we've left Iraq and Syria. We've ceded them as grounds breeding grounds of terrorism. So all of these things done in the name of legacy as opposed to common sense and the safety of Americans.
Yeah. Well, I mean, unfortunately, we have to move on, but this issue is definitely not going to go away. The blame game appears to be continuing in Clinton world. This time, it's Bill Clinton's turn. Who's the former president blaming for his wife's loss now? Hint, it's not Hillary.
Fox News Alert, a lot happening this hour. One of the things our news team is doing is pouring through now some unsealed documents, the redacted search warrant that the FBI used to investigate Hillary Clinton's private email server. And now we're getting to know what was actually in it. It is unsealed. So here are a couple of nuggets for you to know. The FBI's investigation established that 27 email chains containing classified information as determined by the relevant original classified authorities have been transmitted through her email server. So 27 email chains, not just single emails, but several of them. And then this is the other particularly interesting point. Now, our team is still reading through this, and we'll update you throughout the day here on Fox News, but this is what's coming forth right now. All right, so Hillary Clinton's advisor, Uma Abedin, handed her laptop, or her phone rather, had it upload onto her husband's laptop. All the information that was classified that she had working for Hillary Clinton went on his laptop. That laptop then became part of the investigation, and now we can confirm this. The U.S. government is saying that the subject's laptop, Anthony Weiner's, was never authorized for the storage or transmission of classified or national defense information. Now, Steve Hayes and I were talking in the break. That seems obvious, and we might have thought it. This confirms it. And that is problematic because now we know that there was classified information that was on a device that no way, no shape or form should ever have had it. All of this is happening as more fingerprinting emerges from the Clinton world. This time from former President Bill Clinton. Watch.
I've never cast a vote I was prouder of. You know, I watched her work for 2 years. I watched her battle through that bogus email deal, be vindicated at the end when Secretary Powell came out. She fought through that. She fought through everything. And she prevailed against it all. But, you know, then at the end we had the Russians and the FBI deal, but she couldn't prevail against that.
Wow. The FBI deal that had all that 27 chain of emails with classified information, as we now know. Meanwhile, President-elect Donald Trump earlier today hit back at Bill Clinton after the former president in an earlier interview blamed FBI Director James Comey for his wife's loss and said Mr. Trump only knows how to appeal to, quote, angry white men. President-elect Trump tweeted this. Bill Clinton stated that I called him after the election. Wrong. He called me with a very nice congratulations. He doesn't know much, especially how to get people, even with an unlimited budget, out to vote in the vital swing states. And more. They focused on the wrong states. Steve, this is a lot.
It is a lot. I mean, I would argue that I think Donald Trump is better off not engaging Bill Clinton on these things.
The house is on fire, let it burn?
Must feel good to do it, to make the point. I mean, he's right in the argument that he's making. But look, I mean, the great irony of what Bill Clinton is saying and what so many Clinton voters and supporters are saying at this point is that they're blaming the entity that had to investigate what Hillary Clinton did rather than Hillary Clinton for what she did originally. I mean, this is further evidence that she jeopardized national security by putting classified information in places that it couldn't be, providing access potentially to our enemies worldwide. And it's just astounding to me that they continue to blame the FBI for having to do an investigation caused by her actions rather than her.
Thought bubble is about to burst.
You know, I hate disagreeing with Steve because he's one of the smartest guys I know, but I have to say I disagree. As a Republican, I am so happy to have a leader who is tweeting back on this stuff and punching back for once, because this is the kind of bogus, using Clinton's words, stuff that they do. There is nothing bogus about what happened. And it wasn't just that the emails were, the classified emails existed on a server that they weren't permitted, but it ended up on not just any laptop, the laptop of a huge weirdo who could have been extorted because of a pedophile.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is serious stuff. So for Bill Clinton to go out and say bogus, good for Trump for fighting back, punching back, because we need to stop letting them get away with this
I get
crap.
the argument. Donald Trump has 1,000 people who he could have make that argument for him. I would say that the things that we talked about in the first half of the show are the things that Donald Trump should be focused on. He should be focused on Guantanamo. He should be focused on jihadism.
But two things about what Rachel's saying. She's saying nobody with his bully pulpit, but remember who first brought up the idea that Anthony Weiner should never have been near any of that information. It was Donald Trump.
Right. There was some foreshadowing there. And look, I think the Democratic Party, they're going to continue to try to find these various scapegoats as to why they lost. But I think what this highlights, and if the further mishandling of classified information, that all of Hillary Clinton's problems begin and end with her. I mean, it was her actions, the bleach bidding of tens of thousands of emails that invited the criminal FBI investigation. And the Democratic Party chose someone under investigation by the FBI. Also, there were serious mistakes by her campaign, including not visiting states like Wisconsin, which Rachel is intimately
Minnesota.
Beyond all of that, Bill Clinton did a lot of damage to this woman's campaign as well. Remember when he was talking about what a disaster Obamacare was? He got in a fight with Black Lives Matter protesters, and on top of everything else, he raised serious concerns about her role in his sexual whatever, and had a lot of young feminists, a lot of young women around the country saying, this is not my version of feminism, are the Clintons and the Clintons' definition of it. So he should take a look in the mirror, because he's done a lot of damage to her campaign as well.
Real quickly about the breaking news this hour, Steve, as we learn more about what's in that search warrant, just buttonhole it for us for the American public. Why is that important?
Well, I think it could be important if we learn why James Comey felt compelled to send this letter again. I mean, that's been obviously the source of a lot of public debate in the country. Certainly Democrats are trying to use that
late letter right before the election.
Decisive. I mean, it's not the case that caused the turn towards Donald Trump. The turn, you can actually look at the polling, started 4 days before the Comey letter. But I think it probably accelerated the turn. It's important to give people context about what exactly he was looking for.
All right. The White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest again accusing President-elect Donald Trump of encouraging Russian meddling in the presidential election. This as hopes for a smooth transition appear to be falling apart. Hopes. Is President Obama trying to undermine his successor? We'll talk about it.